Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's again, it's a great pleasure to be here. I also want to acknowledge our presence on Treaty 7 land. When I was growing up in southern Alberta and then Saskatchewan, I barely thought about the treaties that had defined this land politically. If I thought about them at all, I thought of the treaties as a negotiation for the surrender of land. It's only much later that I began to understand them as the beginning of a relationship, which is, as I understand it now, how we should think of it. I want to thank, of course, Sherry D., but also, again, the volunteers who've done so much to make this gathering such a success. And I especially want to acknowledge Shelf Life Books because, you know, who knows what the future will hold in terms of reading and thinking. I mean, as long as there are people, there will be an imaginative use of language, which is wonderful, but there won't necessarily always be books, and there won't necessarily be independent bookstores. So while we still have them, I think we should make good use of them. So Shelf Life Books seems to me an outstanding example of what a bookstore should be. So. I'm going to read one fragment of prose from Spoken Here and 3 poems, but I'm going to do something unusual with one of the poems, which is to inflict it on you twice, and trust that you won't mind that. First, I'm going to read the fragment of prose from Spoken Here, Travels Among Threatened Languages. The topic, broadly speaking, for this evening is ways of thinking about loss. And so I did a lot of research before writing Spoken Here, but if the book works, it's because the research is transmuted into something of the imagination. It's not just facts. So this is the end of the chapter on Provençal, a language, a great literary language, the language of the troubadours that is still spoken in southern France, but by fewer and fewer people. And I'm describing a meeting I had with a writer, Serge Beck, who writes in French, and he also writes in Provençal. There was one more topic I had to broach. And do you use Provençal in your daily life, I asked. Of course, he said to my surprise, but less and less. And partly it's because I find the words are missing. I speak Provençal to a certain extent when I go into a village. Sometimes there are meetings when I use it. But mostly, I speak it at funerals. The women gather together in one group, the men in another, and we speak in Provençal. The men talk about the harvest and they talk about hunting. It's curious. At that moment, you feel the weight of tradition, and the tradition rises up again. At funerals, something leads us to speak spontaneously in Provençal. Beck and his black setter walked out into the warm afternoon to see me off. He urged me to take care on the winding lane back to the main road. I waved goodbye, but I hardly saw the man any longer. There was a vision in my mind that refused to go away. A little crowd of people, most of them even older than the priest, who stand on the high steps outside a medieval church and gaze down toward the vineyards and olive groves of a gray-green valley. Their ears still ring with the music of departure, peace, eternal rest, perpetual light, and their minds are restless with the past. There, in that field, the dead one used to go courting. That was the grove struck by lightning in the great storm. But a horn sounds in the distance, and the people in the crowd become aware that they're not as strong as they would like. After a time, the complaining muscles and veins and bladders require them to move. As they shuffle down the church steps, taking precautions not to fall, they bid farewell to each other one more time in the language of their youth. They bid farewell to the language of their youth. Thank you. This is a poem called Labrador, and this arose out of observation, out of thinking, out of being dumbstruck by something I saw. To give it away sort of in advance, Labrador, southeastern Labrador, hardly anybody lives there now. But 7,000 years ago, the first known ceremonial burial in all of North America took place there. So it was, thousands of years ago, it was the center of a culture. Labrador, a gravel road to the sea, a raw wind, the end of a world. A pile of scanty earth heaped with rocks. Under the pile, just off the road, the skeleton of a boy buried face down, a flat stone across his lower back, and to give him hope on his journey, a walrus tusk, reddened pebbles, a flute sculpted from a bird's bone, and the toggled point of a harpoon. A deserted beach, the morning after rain, sliced by a stream through the sand. Fragments of a warship near a lighthouse, the color of ice, beyond a village of 7,000 years ago, who wrapped his body in bark and animal skins and placed his head toward the falling sun, who lit the fires beside him and cooked food. No bowheads offshore, no walruses, no smoke curling over the valley, the end of a world, a raw wind, a sandpiper's tracks along the shore. Now I'm going to read the poem that has been mentioned now twice in the introduction, Glasburian. It's in 5 parts, and I'm going to read each of the first, after I read the first, second, third, and fourth part the first time, I'm going to stop and talk about it for a bit, and then I'm going to read the entire poem straight through with no commentary or explanation or anything. And in the first line of part 1, I take Shakespeare's name in vain, and I just want to acknowledge that this is the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. And that one reason, not the only reason, one reason why Shakespeare was such an incredible writer was that he was an inveterate coiner of words. He made language new. What we're losing, what we have lost in a sense, by not being Shakespeare's contemporary, is not understanding how he was coining words like any hip-hop artist. Like, you know, he was bedazzled, bloodstained, dauntless, eyeball, fashionable, moonbeam, newfangled, swagger, uncomfortable, addiction, skim milk. All of them and many hundreds of other words first showed up in Shakespeare. So that's my little tribute to Shakespeare. So, like I said, what I'm going to do is read each of the first 4 parts of Glasburian in turn. Shakespeare was an upstart, Dante a dabbler. Compared to Shamil Bakhtashini, he of the Snow Peak sagas, the Quince Blossom love songs, and a leopard's argument with God. Not a word of his work was dipped in printer's ink, and most of it is long forgotten. Little wonder, for the master lived and died in the Archie tongue, spoken in a single wind-burnt village where Dagestan falls toward the sea. The language pleasured Shamil like a lover, giving him poetry without an alphabet, listeners without a page. His grave is rumored to lie among the roots of an apricot tree on the scarp of a Caucasian mountain, where, if you believe the villagers, once a month, the wind recites his lyrics. The whole genesis for this poem, which is an elegy for dying languages, the whole catalyst for it was, I suddenly thought, you know, Shakespeare, Dante, Proust, Tolstoy, all the famous writers are writing in big languages. What happens if someone of an incredible talent was born into a very small language group and had no chance to reach a wider audience? I knew that the Caucasus of southern Russia, Armenia, that area, is a hotbed of languages. There are hundreds of them. Just so you know, Archie has fewer than 1,000 speakers, 26 vowel sounds, about 75 consonants. English has about 25. Archie has about 75 different consonant sounds. And the verb forms are so complicated that, according to Wikipedia, so it must be true, according to Wikipedia, you can derive 1,502,839 possible verb forms from a single root. That's Archie for you. Part 2. She flew from Boston to Port Moresby for this. An outboard ferry ride past a dripping wall of trees to a yet unstudied village where the Mumbum language survives. The wall splits open. She clambers out and strides from the dock, escorted by a flock of blue-winged parrots, to find the gathered islanders seated on the red soil beside a reed-thatched bar, watching Fatal Attraction on satellite TV. Now, unfortunately, I got a couple things wrong there. I knew that Papua New Guinea is the home of an incredible profusion of languages, and the other night I heard the linguistic anthropologist Christine Schreier give the number, and I think it may have been 862. Thank you, Christine. However, I didn't realize, never thinking that I would run into a female linguistic anthropologist who had actually worked in New Guinea, I didn't realize that Mombum is spoken in the Indonesian side of Papua, so you wouldn't, of the island, so you wouldn't actually fly to Port Moresby. Anyway, moving right along, part 3. Reason tells me it doesn't matter if the final speaker of Huron goes gray in a suburb of Detroit where nobody grasps a syllable of his grandmother's tongue. Reason tells me it's not important if Basque and Abenaki join the dozens of unproductive languages lately disposed of. What's the big deal? Where's the beef? Reason is scavenging the earth. More, more, it cries. You can't tell it to use imagination. You can't ask it to stop and listen to the absence of Norn. I was told by a Mohawk Onondaga anthropologist whom I met many years ago that there was an old man living in Detroit whose grandmother was Huron and who had been taught the language by his grandmother. And being the good journalist that I was at that stage, I pressed him to tell me the name of the man, and being the respectful person that Roy was, he refused to tell me. So I have no idea whether that story is true or not. But Huron as a living language would have disappeared by 1900 in the last place in Canada where it's still spoken, Wendake near Quebec City. Survived at least as a ceremonial language of chants and songs in Oklahoma, of all places, Indian Territory, where the remnant speakers of that language were taken or went themselves in the 19th century. And they were recorded, these chants and songs were recorded on wax cylinders by the anthropologist Marius Barbeau. And then 75 years later, because those wax cylinders could still, with the right technology, be listened to, the people at Wendake near Quebec City were able to make use of those chants recorded in Oklahoma to help bring back their language for ceremonial purposes, at least. Part 4. Tega dumeanur glasburian, kira friend min. If you take the girl from the glass castle, dear kinsman of mine, so a voice claims in a Norn ballad, plucked by a rambling scholar off the lips of a toothless crofter he found on a Shetland island in 1774. Soon the language was a mouthful of place names. Yemda mineso vrilden stienda gedem in varatodin. As long as this world is standing, you'll be spoken of. Norn was a descendant of Old Norse, and it lasted on the Orkney and Shetland Islands off the north coast of Scotland until the early 19th century. And in 1774, someone called George Lowe recorded 35 stanzas of a poem called The Ballad of Hildina. And I'm going to read 3 of these stanzas now. So these stanzas have perhaps never before been spoken on Treaty 7 territory. Just so you know you have a better sense of what Norn sounded like. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all 35 stanzas. De vara larlin o Orkneyar, for frinde sin spread oro, where the unskilled meon on vanero eidna fro. Tega du meon or glasburian, kera friende min, jamde min eso vrildin stinda, gede min vara todin. No linga stug an konigen, o linga wo and swo, wordig var doch muge sena, jakaskior per mogeso. Glasburian. Shakespeare was an upstart, Dante a dabbler compared to Shamilbach to Shani. He had the Snow Peak sagas, the Quince Blossom love songs, and a leopard's argument with God. Not a word of his work was dipped in printer's ink, and most of it is long forgotten. Little wonder, for the master lived and died in the Archie tongue, spoken in a single wind-burnt village where Dagestan falls toward the sea. The language pleasured Shamil like a lover, giving him poetry without an alphabet, listeners without a page. His grave is rumored to lie among the roots of an apricot tree on the scarp of a Caucasian mountain where, if you believe the villagers, once a month the wind recites his lyrics. She flew from Boston to Port Moresby for this, an outboard ferry ride past a dripping wall of trees to a yet unstudied village where the Mumbum language survives. The wall splits open. She clambers out and strides from the dock, escorted by a flock of blue-winged parrots, to find the gathered islanders seated on the red soil beside a reed-thatched bar, watching Fatal Attraction on satellite TV. Reason tells me it doesn't matter if the final speaker of Huron goes gray in a suburb of Detroit where nobody grasps a syllable of his grandmother's tongue. Reason tells me it's not important if Basque and Abenaki join the dozens of unproductive languages lately disposed of. What's the big deal? Where's the beef? Reason is scavenging the earth. More, more, it cries. You can't tell it to use imagination. You can't ask it to stop and listen to the absence of Norn. Take a Dumeonur Glasburian, kira friend min. If you take the girl from the glass castle, dear kinsman of mine, so a voice claims in a Norn ballad, plucked by a rambling scholar off the lips of a toothless crofter he found on a Shetland island in 1774. Soon the language was a mouthful of place names. Yamdamin essen vril distienda, Gedamin Varatodin. As long as this world is standing, you'll be spoken of. That music, it's only wind bruising the chimes in a crystal fortress high on Mount Echo. Each time we lose a language, the ghosts who made use of it cast a new bell. The voices magnify. Soon, listen, they'll outpeal the tongues of earth. Wow, that made everybody silent. Okay, just one more. I don't want to abuse my length of time up here, so I want to say that it's not just about loss. Many years ago, when I wrote Glasburian in the 1990s and Spoken Here, I was doing the research for that. Maybe 15 years ago, and in Spoken Here, there is a movement from the least hopeful in terms of language survival to the most hopeful. So the last chapter is about Welsh, and my parents were born inside Welsh. My wife is learning Welsh and is now quite proficient in it. And it's important to recognize that as well as languages being created, which is wonderful, there are also many indigenous languages here in Canada and elsewhere where people are very determined to keep the language alive and are doing everything in their power to make sure that happens. So the last poem I'm going to read is called Evanechted, which is the name of a little village in North Wales. In a way, this is, I guess, a love poem to my wife, but also in a sense to Wales and to Welsh itself. I don't often read it in public because there are two words that are so misleading when you hear them. On the page, they're not misleading at all, but I need to explain these two words, otherwise you'll think, what the hell is going on? Beyond the U's, this is Y-E-W-S, not use all. It's the trees, right? The U's are, there are U's that are sometimes a couple of thousands years old, pre-Christian in the cemeteries of Wales. Beeches. Second to last line of the poem, the frosted beeches. These are beech trees, B-E-E-ches, not what you're thinking about. Beech trees, okay? Evanechted. Land or place of the monk, you say it means in the old language. Though if robed and cowled, God-hungry men ever knew this village. Smattered houses, a stream, a whitewashed church, a pub where drovers would recuperate, their doomed flocks clamoring beyond the yews, the story's lost. I imagine the name means hamlet in the valley near a fern-fringed waterfall dividing the roadless wood, where you, with luck, might hear a black grouse drumming or glimpse a red squirrel. You, walking at the year's turn, finding above the sheep-colored fields and frosted beaches a nail of moon, call it chluad in the old language. Thank you.